message integrity and authentication, and then some application of this security such as email, SSL, IP security, and wireless LANs and firewalls. Okay, so the first question, what is network security? So when we talk about the network security, confidentiality is very important. So what's the confidentiality is that only sender and the intended, we call it intended receiver, they should understand the message contents. Anyone else shouldn't understand these private messages. So in order to achieve this confidentiality, sender encrypts message and the receiver is gonna decrypt this message in order to achieve the confidentiality. So we have another aspect which is called authentication. What's the authentication? We have a sender, we have a receiver. They want to confirm the identity of each other. They should know whoever is, who is the sender and who is the receiver. So this is called authentication. And another aspect of the network security is called message integrity. This is also important as important others. So the goal here is to send a message, and the sender as well as the receiver, they need to ensure that message is not, is not altered or is not modified, basically. So we need to make sure that we send the original and receive the original message without any modification, any changes. And the last feature of network security is called access and availability. These services must be accessible and available to the users. Okay, so what is the problem? Let's look at this problem. In network, we have friends and enemies. So assume that there are three characters. The first one is called Alice, the second is Bob, and the third one is Trudy. So this is a well-known, characters in the network security world, as you know. Bob and Alice, they are friends and they want to communicate with each other securely. And Trudy is the bad guys or bad girl, which is intruder. So she's trying to intercept, delete, and sometimes add or modify the messages. So here we have Alice, and we have the Bob here. She wants to send a secure message through the secure sender and the channel, of course, and the Bob wants to receive this message through the secure receiver. And in the middle, we have the bad girl, which is Trudy. So these are characters, as I said, so who might be Bob and who might be Alice. They're real life, there are real life Bobs and Alices in the network, as you know. But when it comes to the network, in terms of technology, the web browser and server for any kind of electronic transaction can be Bob or Alice. Online banking client or server can be Bob or Alice. DNS servers, they can communicate among themselves. They can be Bob or Alice. Routers that are exchanging routing table, they can be Bob or Alice. And you can increase this example. So as I mentioned, so there are bad guys or girls in the network. So the question is, what can a bad guy do in a network? So they can do a lot of bad stuff, and some of them are eavesdrop. So eavesdrop, they can intercept the message between a sender and receiver. And then another bad things that they can do is to actively insert messages into the connection. And another threat is called impersonation, or some people they call spoofing attack. So they can fake source address in packet or in any field in the packet. Another another threat is called hijacking. They can take over the ongoing connection by removing a sender or receiver, and instead of them, they can insert by themselves in the place. Another threat is called DOS, denial of service. So the main goal here is to prevent service from being used by others by attacking to the resources. So these are the some threats that we can encounter in a network. Okay, so after this introduction, now let's talk about cryptography, which is the core of security. So, of course, this security by itself is a class. We are gonna just give a basics of this cryptography to show the problem and the solution. So as we mentioned, we have Alice and Bob. So Alice wants to send a message in terms of plain text, but before sending this plain text, it applied the encryption algorithm to obtain the ciphertext. So encryption ciphering is kind of a transformation, mapping the plain text to another kind of text, which we call ciphertext. So when the Alice applied this encryption algorithm, it used some keys, and we're going to talk about these keys can be a public or private keys. So applying the encryption algorithm, we obtain the encrypted message, which is called ciphertext. Ciphertext then is transmitted to the receiver, and then the Bob is going to receive this encrypted message, which is called ciphertext, and apply the decryption so that we can convert this ciphertext back to the original message, which is called plain text. So Bob needs some kind of keys in order to decryption, and these keys can be a public or private keys that we're going to see. So these are some mathematical terms. M is for the plain text message. Ka of M is ciphertext, which is the encrypted message with key Ka, and applying the Bob's key to this encrypted data, it can reconstruct the original message, which is M. So how we can break an encryption scheme? So let's look at the ciphertext only attack. In this case, the Trudy the bad girl has ciphertext she can analyze. So how Trudy or the bad girl can analyze these ciphertext in order to decrypt? So one of them is called brute force. In the brute force, she can search through all the keys. And the second approach is called statistical analysis. Through this technique, it can decrypt some of this ciphertext. So another attack is called non-plain text. Trudy has plain text that is correspond to the ciphertext. So then the Trudy, in this case, can determine the pairings for ALICEBO. So simply, another one is called chosen plain text attack. So the Trudy can get ciphertext for the chosen plain text. So these are the some typical attacks that we face in the network. Okay, let's talk about the some basic scenarios for the cryptography, which is called symmetric key cryptography. Again, the same scenario. We have Alice and Bob. So the plain text is here, the message M, and we are going to apply encryption and decryption algorithm. In this case, we call symmetric key because Bob and Alice share the same key. So that's why it's called symmetric key. So the key used by Bob and Alice are same, which is we call KS, symmetric key. So the same key, Alice is gonna use this key for the encryption. So we obtain the sphere text, which is KS of M, and then we send to the receiver. So the Bob is gonna use the same key KS to decrypt in order to obtain the original message, which is M in this case. So some simple encryption scheme. Substitution sphere, this is one of the basic scheme. So it's very simple. So you're going to substitute one thing for another, which we call monoalphabetic sphere. So you substitute one letter for another. So this plain text, for instance, A, B, C up to Z. And then we have a sphere text, which has its own order, M and up to Q. So let's say how we're gonna encrypt this, encrypt the Bob, I love you, Alice. So you're gonna replace the B, as you see, with the N, B with N, O with K, and then again Bob, B is with the N. So we replace the Bob with the N, K, N. And then I, as you see, is replaced by S. L is replaced by G. O is replaced by K. And V is replaced by T. And then E is replaced by C. Love. And then U, Y is replaced with W. O is replaced by K. And U is replaced by Y, and so on. So it's just map this ladder with the corresponding ladder in the sphere text. So this is called substitution sphere, which is one of the simple encryption method. So what's the encryption key in this case? Is mapping from the set of 26 ladders to the set of 26 ladders. So this is our encryption key in this simple encryption method. There are more complex, sophisticated encryption approach. For instance, instead of one substitution spheres, we have n substitution spheres, which is M1, M2, Mn. And the cycling, on top of that, there's a cycling pattern. For instance, if you have a 4 cycling patterns, is M1, M3, M4, M3, M2. So that means you're gonna replace according to this cycling pattern. So for each new plain text symbol, you use subsequent substitution pattern in cyclic pattern. For instance, let's give an example. I want to say dog. So that means D is gonna, you're gonna obtain from the M1 sphere, and then O is from M3 sphere according to this pattern, and the G is gonna obtain from the M4 sphere. So this is more complex than to the previous sphere method. So in this case, encryption key is n substitution spheres and a cyclic pattern. So there are many thousands or hundreds of different encryption methods in the literature, which is I'm skipping here. So let's look at some. These are the basics of the cryptography in terms of theoretical information, but we have some practical, method or standard. One of the first one is called DES. It is a type of symmetric key crypto, and it stands for Data Encryption Standard. And this is an US encryption standard, which is called NIST 1993. It consists of 56-bit symmetric key and 64-bit plain text input. And we, encrypt this blockwise with the cipher block chaining. So according to this standard encryption standard, DS, so the question is, how secure is this? This is one of the first standard in 1990s. So 56-bit key encrypted phrase can be decrypted in less than a day. So if you're using a brute force method, so you can decrypt within within a day or so. So they have another version of DS, which is called 3DS. So encrypt 3 times with 3 different keys. I'm skipping the details. Okay, this is more advanced standard security encryption standard, which is called AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. So this is replaced the DS in 2001 by NIST US standard. It also is a symmetric key. So it processes data in 128-bit blocks, and it has different keys options such as 128, 192, and 256 bits. So security using the brute force. So the question is, how secure is this AES standard compared to the DES? So let's compare it. And if you want to use a brute force decryption technique to decrypt the DS, it takes about 1 second. But with the same technique, it takes about 149 trillion years for AES. So you see how more secure is this. So public key cryptography, starting with the symmetric key that both receiver and the sender use the same key. So it requires sender and receiver to know shared secret key. So both they use the same key and they should know so this there are 2 types of key in this case. The first one is called public encryption key, which is known to all, and the private decryption key is known only to the receiver. So let's look at it. So public key cryptography scenario. We have the plain text that is going to be sent by Alice by applying the encryption algorithm. In this case, it utilized the Bob's public key. So we apply the Bob's public key to obtain the sphere text and then send to the Bob's. So Bob utilize its own private key, which is KB minus, in order to obtain the plain text message. So only the Bob has this private key, so it can decrypt these messages. I'm skipping this detail. So there's a other type of kind of uh, encryption methods. So in this case, it's called RSA. Message is a bit stream, is a bit pattern, and bit pattern can be uniquely represented by integer numbers. So you convert into the integer number. So the encrypted message in this case is gonna be an integer number. For instance, this is my message, which can be a text, video, or voice, 1001001, and then according to this RSA, I convert this into a decimal number, which is 145. So these are the detail of RSA. I'm skipping. Okay. So these are the main basics of the cryptography that you should know. Now we are ready to move on to some feature of network security, including the authentication and message integrity. So how do we achieve authentication? First, let's look at the problem. Authentication is to prove that you are the right person at the sender and the receiver side. You need to prove each other that you are the right person. So in this case, the main goal, we have the two characters, Alice and Bob. Bob wants Alice to prove her identity to him. So because Alice is gonna send a message, so in this case, the Alice needs to prove that it's her identity to Bob. So one of the first approach, Alice says, "Hey, I am Alice." And of course, this is not enough, right? Because the Trudy can say the same thing. So the reason is that in a network, Bob cannot see Alice. So therefore, the Trudy simply can declare herself to be Alice. Instead of real Alice, Trudy can say, "Hey, I am Alice." So that is gonna fail, right? But but by just saying that Alice, "Hey, I am Alice," is not enough to prove that she's Alice. Let's look at the second scenario, another try. She can, send her IP address in the IP packet along with the message that I am Alice. Does that work? No, because Trudy can create similar packet by spoofing attack, and it can utilize Alice IP address and create the same packet and send to the Bob. So that also doesn't work. Another scenario could be Alice IP address. We already said. So in the third solution, the Alice can include its password or secret password, let's say, to prove it. And then Bob is going to reply back, OK, and then Alice IP address. But here, again, which we call playback attack, Trudy can record Alice packets, take the copy of this, and then later place it back to the Bob. So this is called playback attack. So in this case, that doesn't work either. Let's try another one. Instead of the Alice password. Now Alice says I am Alice and sends her encrypted password to prove herself. And the only things in this compared to 3.0 is that the password is encrypted. But again, the Trudy can record and play back to the Bob later on. So with the spoofing attack. So that also didn't work. So in this case, so one of the main problems, the playback attack, we need to solve this issue. One of the solutions is to send nonce. So it's a number used only once in a lifetime. So it's called nonce. So to prove Alice is live, Bob sends Alice nonce, which we call R. Alice must return this R with encrypted with shared secret key. So first of all, Alice says, hey, I am Alice. And then Bob is going to send this nonce R number. And then Alice is live and only Alice knows key to the encrypt nonce. So it must be Alice. And in order to improve further, this previous scenario, app 4.0 requires shared symmetric key. So can we authenticate using only public key techniques? So that's the question. So in this scenario, we use the nonce number and the public key cryptography. So let's look at the complete scenario. Alice says, I am Alice, and then Bob generate and send the R, which is the nonce, and then so, and the Alice is gonna encrypt this R with its private key, and then Bob is gonna send me your public key so that it can decrypt. So Alice sent back the public key to the Bob in order to decrypt the nonce number, which is R in this case. And there are different kind of security issues, which we call man or woman in the middle attack. So what is this middle in the middle attack? In this case, Trudy can act like an Alice to Bob and Bob to Alice. So it can have two characters. It can act like a Bob. It can act like a Alice. So when the Alice send a message, I am Alice, Trudy can act like a Bob. Hey, I am Bob. So that's why it can send an nonce, which is the R. And then Alice is going to send its private key encrypted nonce. And then, sorry, encrypted nonce is going to send to the Trudy. Trudy is going to ask for the Alice public key, and Alice is respond back by sending her public key to Trudy. So the Trudy can, decrypt this message. Okay. Similarly, it can act like a Alice when the Bob sends some messages. So this is a security issue in this case. So it's really difficult to detect such man or woman in the middle attack. So Bob receives everything that Alice sends and vice versa. So the problem here is that Trudy receives all the messages as well. So that's authentication and related issues. Now let's look at the message integrity. So starting with the digital signatures. So cryptographic technique is like a handwritten signature. So we have the handwritten signature. When you have a document, you sign it with your pen or pencil. So the cryptographic technique resembles to handwritten signatures. So sender, in this case, let's say, assume that is Bob. It digitally signs the document uh, by establishing that he's the document owner or the creator. So when you sign a document, that means you are the owner of this document. And this is verifiable and non-forgeable. So in this case, the recipient, in this case, the Alice, because the Bob is sender, can prove to someone that Bob and no one else must have signed this document. So when the Bob, in this case the sender, he signed a document digitally and sent to the Alice. Alice is the recipient, and it can prove that this document is signed only by Bob. Okay, what's the digital signatures? And so basically, let's explain it. Let's say we have a message M and simple digital signature for message M. How do we create a digital signature for a document or a message? So in this case, let's say Bob signs a message. So this is a message that is going to be sent by Bob to Alice. Dear Alice, blah, blah, blah. So Bob is going to sign this message by encrypting with his private key. So his private key is KB minus. And then we obtain KB minus M. So this is the signed message by Bob using the public key encryption algorithm. And then it's sent to the Alice. So simply by how do we create the digital signature is just signing a message, or in other words, encrypting message with your private key. So suppose Alice receives this message M with signature, of course, by Bob, which is KB minus M. Alice verifies message is signed by Bob by applying Bob's public key, so which is the KB plus to the KB minus M. When you apply this, then checks the message. If M, whoever signed message, must have used Bob's private key, right? But we don't know exactly, but this is the signature of Bob's. That's we know. So that's why Alice can verify that Bob signed this message. And then for sure, we can say that no one else signed message. Bob signed this message or not M other messages. So non-repudiation, Alice can take this message and signature of the KBM minus, which is the private key of Bob, to the court if there's some dispute, right? If there's some disagreement or fight, Alice can take this message along with the Bob's private key and prove that this Bob signed this message. And we have another concept which is called message digest. We have a large message M, and we apply some hash function to obtain h of M. So this is computationally expensive to public key encrypt long messages. The main objective here is to use a fixed length, easy to compute digital fingerprint. So in order to achieve this, we apply the hash function h function to m in order to get a fixed size message digest, which is h of m. So what are the hash function properties? Is a many to one, and it produces the fixed size message digest, which in other words fingerprint, unique fingerprint. So, and because if you receive this message digest X, computationally infeasible to find M such that, so it's really hard to, even if you have this message digest X, and it's and if it computationally infeasible to find the original message. Some example, even the different messages, but they can create a different identical checksum. So I'm skipping this. Hash function has some also standard. One of them is MD5 hash function, which is widely used. The standard number is RFC 1321. So in this standard, it computes a 128-bit message digest in 4-step process. So arbitrary 128-bit string X appears too difficult to construct message M. And there's another algorithm, which is SHA1, is also used. This is a US standard by NIST. So compared to 128-bit in the MD5, we have 160-bit message digest in this standard. Okay, there's another concept in the network security which is called certification authorities, CA. So the main function is function of this authority, this entity is to bind a public key to a particular entity. So it's basically assign a specific public key to an entity. I'm not saying it's a person, it can be a network entity such as router, gateway, and so on. So the main job of this authority is to assign a public key to a specific entity, E. So entity in this case can be a person or router. So you're the person, for instance, you go this CA authority and you register your public key with this certification authority. So how this registration is done, the E, which is the register, it provides proof of identity to CA. This can be your Turkish national number, or it can be passport, whatever proof of ID to this authority. And then this authority CA, it creates a certificate that assigns the E to its public key, and then you obtain the certificate that contains E's public key that is digitally signed by this authority CA. So at the end of the day, CA says this is E's public key. So this is Mehmet's public key, this is Fatma's public keys, and so on. So, and you see visually how it works. You go to the certification authority and you prove your identity, and then they assign a public key, private key to this entity, and then you obtain your certification. So when Alice wants Bob's public key, for instance, Alice wants to Bob's public key, it's gonna get Bob's certificate. Either it can ask from Bob or somewhere else. And then apply this CA's public key to Bob's certificate to get Bob's public key. So we obtain this certification and we apply this CA public key so that we can get the Bob's public key, which is KB plus. Okay. So these are the main principles of the network security. This is the first part. Now we are moving to the second part, which to show some, examples in practice, such as email, in SSL, IPsec, and wireless LANs and the firewalls. So let's have a 10 minutes break. Any question? All right, 10 minutes break.